You might think you understand the current situation in the Middle East, but over the last 24 hours, the entire playbook just got shredded. Real talk? The definition of how this war is being fought has completely flipped, and the United States is suddenly finding itself backed into a very dangerous, highly complicated corner. For the past week, we've seen relentless, heavy-handed airstrikes. We're talking about over 80 Israeli fighter jets dropping hundreds of bombs on key military sites right inside Tehran in central Iran, actively trying to neutralize deep bunker complexes and launch facilities. But here is the massive development that a lot of people are missing. Iran isn't trying to win a head-to-head conventional war. They are fully aware they can't match American or Israeli firepower. Instead, their strategy revolves entirely around victory denial. If they can't secure a win, they are going to make damn sure the U.S. can't either. And their very first move, systematically blinding the American military. Think about it this way. If a heavyweight fighter can't see, it doesn't matter how hard they can punch. In just a matter of days, Iran has managed to target and severely damage some of America's most advanced, heavily guarded early warning systems in the region. They took out a crucial ANTPY-2 radar, which serves as the eyes of the highly advanced THAAD missile defense system, stationed over in Jordan. On top of that, they managed to strike a massive $1.1 billion early warning radar installation down in Qatar. These aren't just random lucky shots. By taking out multi-million-dollar radar arrays with cheap, disposable drones, Iran is deliberately punching massive holes in the U.S. missile defense net. Without those sensors in the sky, America's ability to intercept advanced ballistic missiles drops drastically, leaving our bases heavily exposed. But taking out the radars was only the physical half of their plan. The second half is a massive psychological game aimed right at our regional allies. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian just released a video message that is essentially a calculated wedge designed to completely fracture the U.S. alliance in the Middle East. He directly addressed neighboring Gulf states, countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, and offered them a highly conditional deal. He explicitly stated that if these Gulf nations refuse to let the U.S. military use their airspace and bases to launch attacks, then Iran will immediately stop firing missiles into their territory. It is basically a geopolitical protection racket. Iran is whispering to these leaders, you want your airports to stay open? You want your oil to keep flowing safely? And then tell Washington to fight its own battles without you. This puts an unbelievable amount of pressure on Gulf nations that rely heavily on U.S. military integration, but absolutely cannot afford to have their local economies turn to ash. And honestly, the ripple effects of this strategy are already dragging the biggest global superpowers right into the middle of the chaos. Because here is the reality check. Iran is surviving this onslaught, and it's not by luck. A country under decades of crippling economic sanctions doesn't just wake up one morning with the pinpoint precision required to blind a superpower. You don't just guess the exact hotel where CIA officers are sleeping or the exact coordinates of a billion-dollar radar array. That takes real-time, military-grade satellite intelligence, and they are getting it directly from a foreign hand. Enter Vladimir Putin. Russia is watching this entire Middle Eastern powder keg explode. And honestly, they are smiling without firing a single shot. Intelligence experts are confirming that Moscow is actively sharing highly classified, specific ground intelligence with Tehran. It's one thing to own a stockpile of ballistic missiles. It is a completely different ballgame to know exactly where to point them to hit American assets halfway across the world. Russia has spent decades building the capability to track our forces globally, and by handing that data over to Iran, they've turned a regional proxy fight into a masterclass in Russian military strategy. You can see their fingerprints all over the way Iran is systematically dismantling command and control centers. But why? What does Putin actually get out of this? It all comes down to leverage and oil. If this conflict escalates and the Strait of Hormuz, the most critical oil choke point on the planet, gets completely blocked, global energy markets will go into absolute freefall. Gas prices right here in the U.S. would skyrocket overnight. And who benefits the most when global oil supplies are choked off? Russia. Washington is already quietly telling countries like India to keep processing Russian crude just to stabilize the market. Plus, every single day the United States is bogged down fighting in the Middle East is another day we aren't focusing our resources on Ukraine. For Moscow, dragging this war out is the ultimate win-win scenario. And if Russia is the biggest winner right now, China is a very close second. Beijing is playing their classic long game, hide your strength, bide your time. They aren't overtly flexing their military muscles, but they are quietly tightening a massive economic noose around the Pentagon's neck. Remember that $1.1 billion advanced radar system in Qatar that just got turned into scrap metal? Rebuilding it isn't just about spending another billion taxpayer dollars. To construct those highly advanced radar arrays, the defense industry needs massive quantities of a rare metal called gallium. The catch? China controls almost the entire global supply chain for gallium and rare earth minerals. If the US military wants to replace those blind spots, Beijing basically holds the veto power. They can simply refuse to export the materials, leaving our missile defense net permanently crippled. But China's involvement goes way deeper than just hoarding metals. Just like Russia, Beijing has a massive vested interest in keeping Iran in the fight. China buys 80% of Iran's oil exports. If the US were to step in and completely take over or shut down that supply, it would be a strategic disaster for the Chinese economy. So, behind closed doors, they are reportedly supplying the liquid propellant and rocket tech Iran needs to keep firing. They are even providing alternative satellite GPS data, so Iranian missiles don't have to rely on American navigational systems. But here is where this global chess match gets truly mind-bending. Because while Russia and China are propping up Iran, the US is pulling in favors from the most unexpected place imaginable, Ukraine. Think about the irony here. For the last couple of years, Russia has been bombarding Ukrainian cities with Iranian-designed Shahed drones. Through brutal trial and error, the Ukrainians have become the undisputed global experts in how to track, intercept, and destroy these specific drone swarms cheaply, without wasting a $50 million Patriot missile on a $20,000 piece of flying plastic. Now, the US is reportedly asking Kyiv to send those exact drone warfare experts down to the Middle East. They are deploying Ukrainian specialists to help American and Israeli forces build a cheap, effective net against the exact same drones. It is a wild swap of geopolitical favors, but it proves just how interconnected this fight really is. But the United States isn't just pulling favors. They are aggressively draining their own global defenses to keep this Middle Eastern front alive. And this is where the geopolitical math gets genuinely terrifying for Washington. Think about the domino effect here. The Pentagon is burning through expensive high-tech interceptor missiles at an absolutely unsustainable rate. To plug the massive holes Iran just punched in the regional defense network, the US is reportedly having to strip air defense systems from other critical hotspots. We are talking about quietly pulling interceptors out of the Pacific, specifically away from Taiwan and South Korea, and rushing them to the Middle East. You can imagine the celebrations happening in Beijing and Pyongyang right now. China is watching Taiwan's defensive shield thin out in real time, making any future move across the strait exponentially easier. Meanwhile, North Korea is sitting back, watching the US voluntarily remove its own protective batteries from the Korean peninsula. The entire global security map is warping because the current administration is hyper-focused on one single objective: breaking Iran. And that obsession is leading to some seriously desperate strategy. Look at the situation with the Kurdish insurgents. The White House, hoping to trigger an internal collapse, reportedly tried to arm and fund Kurdish fighters to spark a revolution inside Iran and seize control of the oil fields. But here's the thing. The Kurds remember history. They've been burned by sudden US policy shifts and withdrawals before. Reports indicate the insurgents are flat out refusing the deal. They aren't going to fight a proxy war just to be abandoned the second the political winds shift. With proxy forces saying no, the options on the table are shrinking fast, leading to the most dangerous escalation yet: boots on the ground. Right now, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, the military's premier rapid response force, are reportedly sitting on high alert. The tactical objective would likely involve pushing specialized ground forces onto key islands to physically choke off Iran's oil pipelines. But Iran is openly baiting this move. They know they can't shoot down a fleet of B-2 stealth bombers at 30,000 feet. But close-quarters ground engagements? That completely levels the playing field. They are essentially saying, send your troops, we are waiting. And this is a trap the administration cannot afford to fall into, especially considering the climate back home. President Trump is currently facing intense domestic political heat, with new controversies and leaked files dominating the news cycle. Historically, leaders sometimes use foreign conflicts to project strength and shift the media focus. But sending troops into this specific conflict is a massive gamble. The American public is simply not buying into a ground war. Polling data breaks it down clearly. Roughly 60% of Americans are completely opposed to a ground invasion, with barely 12% actually supporting the idea of sending troops into Iran. Americans generally tolerate aerial campaigns where U.S. casualties are zero, but the second soldiers are put directly in harm's way. The political backlash will be absolute chaos. So Washington is currently stuck in the ultimate escalation matrix. And that brings us to the most shocking reality of this entire conflict: the absolute collapse of unquestioned American air superiority. For decades, the U.S. military has guaranteed the safety of the skies over the Middle East. But right now, that defensive umbrella is failing. We're already seeing the legendary Iron Dome struggling to keep up with the overwhelming volume of incoming fire, with projectiles physically impacting major population centers like Tel Aviv. The U.S. is frantically deploying a third aircraft carrier group to the region to try and plug the gaps, but throwing massive billion-dollar ships at a swarm of cheap drones is a losing economic game. The Gulf states are looking up at the sky, realizing they are completely exposed, and they are furious. Here's the terrifying math that should be keeping the Pentagon awake at night. The United States currently produces roughly 600 Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missiles per year. Meanwhile, Iran has the manufacturing capability to crank out an estimated 100 ballistic missiles every single month, completely ignoring their massive stockpile of drones. If you do the math, it's a war of attrition the U.S. cannot sustainably win on defense alone. And if the U.S. wants to quickly rebuild its destroyed infrastructure, like that massive early warning radar in Qatar, it runs straight back into a geopolitical brick wall. Advanced radar systems require high-tech components made with materials like gallium. And as we established, China holds a near monopoly on that entire supply chain. Are they going to hand over the exact rare materials America needs to rebuild its military presence in the region right now? Not a chance. This vulnerability is causing absolute panic among U.S. allies. Reports are surfacing that Gulf nations are deeply upset and nearing a massive financial ultimatum. They are essentially signaling to Washington, if you cannot guarantee the security of our airspace, we will begin yanking our massive financial investments straight out of the American economy. Wall Street corporations are reportedly already trying to quietly lock down funds to prevent a massive capital flight. It is a terrifying financial threat stacked right on top of a military crisis. So, where does this leave us? We are watching a conflict that shows zero signs of slowing down. Between Russia's intelligence sharing, China's resource chokeholds, and Ukraine's drone expertise, this is no longer a localized desert skirmish. It is a full-blown shadow world war. Iran's attempt to diplomatically slice the Gulf states away from the U.S. alliance was a strategic masterstroke that has completely changed the board. And until Washington figures out how to navigate this new reality, the entire global economy is sitting right in the crosshairs.